Okay, good. Thank you very much for attending this presentation, which is starting slightly earlier than 10:45, which I'm very glad about because it will give us some time to talk about a very interesting case study. This is entitled Turning on a Dime Going Online. That is a story of an institution that actually started a very small outfit dedicated to developing online learning courses. And that case study talks about, therefore, the fact that some opportunities arose from the pandemic, and this is about the story of that institution as such. Now, the institution itself actually has a long history, starting in 1992, when it was not even a university, but simply a small outfit that was dedicated to running online degree programs from the Open University of the United Kingdom, and eventually grew into a private university that eventually became a full-fledged autonomous university in Singapore. Sorry about this, something happened. Just sorry about that, something has happened here. Just a second now. And then what happened is basically this autonomous university has grown in importance from its humble origins of distance learning, where there was no online learning at that point in time. But I was dedicated then to working adults. And over time, after, of course, gaining some credibility, becoming a private university and so on, offering full-time degree program for school leavers, no longer just for adult learners, it gained this status of an autonomous university. Now, having said that, the university itself actually is divided into 5 different schools, the latest edition being the School of Law. But as you can see, the focus of the university, at least if you look at the number of schools dedicated to it, are mostly in social sciences, followed by business, law, and of course, the social science and technology. The number of programs offered by the university is about 78 in the distribution that you see here. The blue are undergraduate programs, and the red area of each of those histogram or bar chart actually are about postgraduate programs. Of course, we are mostly focused on the undergraduate program, although as you can see for the School of Business and the School of Human Development, it's focused also on postgraduate program very much so. When it comes to courses, you can see we're offering a tremendous number of courses, 770 courses. You need to know that these courses are managed by a number of people, what we call course coordinator. And this course coordinator actually refers to the people who is in charge of a particular program. So if you have 78 programs, you can expect about 78 head of programs at the very minimum. Some program being larger, therefore, the head of program is assisted by a deputy head of program. Now, the small outfit that I discussed earlier is actually the online learning unit, which is staffed by only 10 people, of which there is only one single academic. At least that was the case in January 2020. And that fact is important for what's going to come afterwards. So the academic was in charge, therefore, of a single program. And that program actually was not fully online then. It was simply a number of courses that were converted from what we call a ground course, basically a course that is supposed to be delivered face-to-face in a classroom situation, with some, in some instances, some elements of online delivery, but the online delivery was never an online delivery in the same fashion that I'm doing now. It was basically asynchronous learning, if you want to put it this way. This second type of delivery mode was called blended learning. And therefore, the online learning unit was responsible for converting about a maximum of 20 courses that belong to the single program in business. These 20 courses by then in January 2020 were not fully converted by then. There were only about 14 of them converted. Now, so therefore the story today will be about talking about what happened to teaching and learning prior to the pandemic, during what we call the circuit breaker measures, which I will explain in a minute what they are. And of course, after lifting and the circuit breaker measures, what happened to teaching and learning. Now, before the pandemic, and that's important to understand what happens during the circuit breaker measures, the teaching and learning modes, or the way of delivering courses online or not online, face-to-face in the university, was actually quite standardized. Meaning by that we actually had 3 different modes of delivery. Face-to-face delivery mode, which is basically 6 classroom-based seminars. Okay, there will be some variations of that. It comes to the blended learning, it's basically 3 classroom-based seminars, but without any online synchronous delivery in the fashion that I'm doing right now. And of course, there was also online learning, which was 6 synchronous online seminars. As you can see, there are 2 poles, and in between something called the blended learning mode. Now, having said that, by 2016, 50% of the university courses actually were of the blended learning type, whereby there was only 3 face-to-face and everything else basically was done by the students asynchronously with very little intervention from the instructors. Now, for the sake of our discussion and presentation today, remember that when I talk about ground courses, I will therefore mention the fact that ground courses include both face-to-face learning courses as well as blended learning courses. And these ground courses, by definition, are managed by the school. Again, a detail is important when we look at the discussion that will come a bit later. And online learning, of course, managed by the online learning unit. Now, in terms of distribution, you need to understand that, as you can see in the blue areas of the bar, there was very large proportion of the courses delivered by the university in either face-to-face or blended mode up till January 2020, term 1, because every semester has 2 terms. Term 1, 6 weeks, and then another 6 weeks after that, which is term 2. Will be the structure itself. So as you can see, only 14 courses were offered fully online at that point in time in January 2020. This is actually at the very beginning of the term, before the pandemic actually hit Singapore per se. Now, in terms of the difference between ground courses, which are repeat blended or face-to-face courses and online courses, actually you can see a lot of similarities actually. Almost everything is the same. Okay, in terms of the courses, obviously this was designed so that a course would actually be offered either in ground mode or in online mode, and the students would definitely know that whichever mode they choose, they would not be losing out on anything in terms of content, learning outcome, course material, and so on. Now, in terms of course material, speaking of what, the course material actually, for instance, a textbook were all e-textbook, regardless of the mode of delivery bit, face-to-face, blended, or online. When it comes to a study guide, which is actually a document which exactly says what it says by its title, it guides the students on how to study, what chapter of the textbooks to write or to read, and what kind of assessment they could carry out and to test their understanding and knowledge through that iStudy guide, which is also linked, by the way, to something that we call chunk lectures. Chunk lectures are simply lectures that are recorded, segments of lectures are recorded based on, as you can see in the example here, on different headings, for instance, media mix, integrated marketing communication, and so on. These are the kind of short lectures that explain the concepts so that it frees the instructors when they go either in a classroom situation for face-to-face or blended delivery mode to talk about something else and simply teaching the concepts. And basically that's something that is used for both ground courses as well as online again. So basically you ask yourself, what's the difference between a ground course and an online course? The answer is very simple. The online courses always have 6 sessions, while the ground courses will have either 6 face-to-face, and if they are blended, it will have 3 face-to-face. The number of students in online courses attending a particular online class will be much smaller, 25 to 30, while the ground courses, they tended to have twice as many students. Obviously, we believe very much that the number of students in a classroom tutorial group was supposed to be smaller for easier interaction. And of course, the main difference in terms of assessment was that in the case of ground courses, there was no discussion board or graded discussions at all, while in online courses, there was such a thing. Now, in terms of this, of course, we're still within the realm of the teaching and learning prior to the pandemic. The teaching and learning infrastructure actually is the one that we have seen before. You need to know that Canvas as a learning management system is used by all courses, regardless of their delivery mode. And of course, that's a very interesting thing because actually it's still an online learning management system. Therefore, used in different fashion depending on the delivery mode, but I would say that the structure itself is quite common across all delivery modes. When it comes to course delivery in terms of face-to-face and blended course, basically it's on classrooms. I repeat again, blended, there is no online delivery. There's only face-to-face delivery in a classroom situation. When it comes to the e-learning infrastructure, as you can see here, it's relying on a tremendous amount of different technologies, either SaaS or IaaS, which basically are supporting the entire infrastructure of the university. And as you can see, regardless of the mode of delivery, we are very much in the cloud. And we're using a lot of technologies that allow us to actually deliver courses effectively. In the left-hand side, you will notice that Zoom is mentioned. And remember, Zoom in this particular case will be the only technology of the entire circle you see here that is not used in ground courses. Zoom is exclusively a technology that has been used for online learning only. Now, in terms of online delivery, course delivery, of course, we would have Zoom by itself, like I explained to you earlier. Now, what happened, as we know, COVID-19 occurred, And it started in December 2019, at least being aware by the world of this situation, as China was mentioning it to the World Health Organization in late or beginning of December 2019. This, of course, reached Singapore eventually in early January, to a point whereby Singapore had to raise what we call the door scorn level to the level orange. And that was followed very quickly afterwards by the fact that the Prime Minister of Singapore decided that the infection rate was so high that we needed to basically kill it in the egg as much as we could. And therefore, on the 3rd of April, the minister actually announced that there will be something called circuit breaker measure. You need to understand, basically, it's a lockdown. It's basically a full confinement with some exceptions in terms of what businesses could remain open and which ones should be closed. Did it affect the education system in Singapore? The answer is obviously yes. And as you can see here, one of the measures was that the schools and Institute of Higher Learning, and our institution here that we're talking about in this case study, was therefore following that as well, had to move fully to home-based learning starting from the 8th of April. 8th of April, by the way, corresponds, roughly speaking, to the beginning of the term 2 of the January 2020 semester. So basically, the university was closed due to the coronavirus. And then we have to talk about teaching and learning during the circuit breaker measures. There were some decisions to be made about what needed to be done to face that pandemic. And therefore, of course, we had to talk about home-based learning. This is actually a directive from the Ministry of Education. We had to think about virtual learning. We had to think about remaining safe for our students and so on and so forth. So that's where we turned on the dime. When I say we, is the university involved in this particular case that we looked at, my colleague and I. Turning on the dime, going on. I mean, turning on dime means, actually, it's an expression, American expression, that means going very quickly. Turning on dime is to go quickly online. And that was only possible, I would say, because of circumstances. But it was not necessarily something that was done without some small, tiny issues, I have to say. Here you have, we're going to look at turning on a dime, going online through 3 different aspects: management, technology, infrastructure, and pedagogy. Why those 3? Because, well, we had to kind of narrow down because of the presentation time limits. But let's look at each one of them separately. And management, we talk about here the academic and admin management of the courses and the programs. So you need to understand that currently the way that the system works is that, for instance, in the January semester, there was a term 1, which I explained to you earlier, and a term 2. And depending on the mode of delivery, face-to-face or blended, which is in the red square, the ground courses, we have different modes of delivery whereby you have face-to-face seminars or an alternate of self-study and face-to-face seminars for blended courses, while the virtual courses would be fully online. So as you can see, those that are face-to-face seminar, face-to-face courses and blended courses, they would have to somehow move to virtual courses. Now, the question, of course, is that possible? Well, the fact is that from a management standpoint, the answer is, well, we'll look at it now. If you look at it, the courses offered up to the January 2020 term 1 semester, there were 14 courses managed by 1 single head of program and 2 admin staff, while the other courses were managed by 60 heads of program and 120 admin staff. So as you can see, it's not feasible to move 376 courses to be managed by a single head of program plus 2 admin staff. This was not possible. So instead of doing this approach, they decided to do this approach. And this approach basically is to create a new online course called an online course. And then the course managed by OLE, with the 14 ones, will be managed by OLE, will be called virtual courses. And in this case, as you can see, the mode delivery was kind of standardized as well. So that was the issue. And of course, as you can see now, the number of courses offered fully online in January 2020 term 2, that the beginning of the circuit breaker until the end basically was 350, and none of them were face-to-face or blended. Therefore, as you can see from the admin management and account management standpoint, I think that the transition was well done and quite smooth, actually. From the technology infrastructure standpoint, we had to go from, in this case, the university has to go from a classroom-based to something else called online. So we provided some training to the students, and of course, they had to be trained on using Zoom. And that was done relatively without a hitch. You can see also there, if you read this particular infographic, that they were exposed to, for instance, breakout rooms and chat rooms and so on. So they were quite well prepared for this. The good news is that because they were familiar with Canvas, and because we were running a Zoom within Canvas, this was actually not an issue at all for the students to get used to at least the technology itself and going online. The only thing that we changed, we got to, of course, get more licenses for Zoom as a whole. So in that sense, the only change for the infrastructure standpoint is basically increasing the number of licenses. Remember, Zoom was used exclusively for online courses delivery, 14 of them. And of course, if you're going to include 350 more courses, this would have to be increased in terms of license. But that was pretty much all there was to it in terms of the change in the technology infrastructure. So that's something that, again, we see that from the technology infrastructure standpoint, it went very well. And of course, the pedagogy. The pedagogy, of course, we're talking about instructors who are not used to teaching online. Only a few numbers of them, those who taught the online courses, fully online courses, were exposed to Zoom, to how to teach online, how to face a class without necessarily seeing the faces, because there's no visual cues, because instructors don't necessarily don't necessarily see the students' face. It's quite difficult. So we therefore had to train the instructors in two aspects, the technology and the pedagogy. And this was done in terms of technology by first live sessions, face-to-face, or initially before the lockdown, and online. And the technology aspect was discussed very much so extensively with Zoom technology in terms of how to use the technology, what were the tools available. When it came to the videos, we left them even with series of very short videos, either from Zoom itself or our own created video, so that they would be able to follow. And eventually, there was, of course, the idea of pedagogy, where how do we teach online? And of course, the key point here, if you look at the titles of the different videos that are listed here in the Canvas learning management system left for the instructor to look at, they had to look at how do we engage students online. This was actually the main fear of the instructors, and I think we addressed it quite well at that point in time, and it got better as we got along. So from the pedagogy point of view, I would say that generally speaking, in that institution, things went quite smoothly. So what happened after lifting the circuit breaker measure? Well, eventually, the things got better in Singapore. You may not know, but Singapore is doing very, very well in handling the pandemic. And in that particular case, that means that the country as a whole can eventually safely transition to a normality of sorts, which is what we call the phase 2. Now, in this particular case, phase 2 meant, among other things, that students would gradually go back to campus. And that's why when it came to phase 2, and of course the July semester, we had a few number of courses that were actually offered again in the face-to-face blended mode, so 85 of them. You may notice that there's a big change in the size of the bars, but don't forget that for January semester, the term 1 and term 2 are separated, while for the other semesters, they are actually combined into one single bar. So conclusion, what did we see there? Well, first of all, there is someone that says, and I think it's quite interesting actually, during this tough time, the concern is not about whether online teaching and learning methods can provide quality education. It's rather how academic institutions will be able to adapt online learning in such a massive manner. So the highlighted point here is concern whether academic institutions will be able to adapt online learning in a massive manner. Now, the good news is that in the case of this particular institution, because of this small, tiny initiative of 20 courses for a single program that were converted for online delivery while the rest of the university was fully on either face-to-face or blended, because of that small initiative and all the technology infrastructure that had to be put into place to make this work, the good news about this is actually it worked very, very well. So I think that the acid test has been passed. Where there are also unexpected benefits. For instance, the legitimization of online learning. Initially, at that institution, online learning was perceived, as it is in many other institutions, at least in the Singapore, maybe Asian context, as it's a lesser education. The good news is that it changed. We looked at, for instance, the students' feedback, and we realized that the student feedback was equal to, or sometimes in some instances even better, in an online delivery for their instructors than it was for the face-to-face. So the same instructor could have gotten actually a good feedback, but gotten probably even better feedback. I would not say that based on analysis that it was true for all instructors, but there was no decrease overall of the instructor feedback because of the change of learning mode. So that's, of course, something which is very good. So lesson learned, of course, is that an online learning situation, an online learning outfit that small, eventually kind of like fit very well with business continuity management initiative within the overall university. Maybe it was circumstantial, maybe it was an opportunity, something happened, but in the end we realized that, as we know, because of the fact that there's these two characters that you must have heard before of crisis being made out of two things, danger and opportunities. Well, sometimes in this case, there was clearly a danger of the whole institution collapsing and not being able to meet the learning needs of the students during that pandemic period of lockdown. But somehow, because of that small outfit learning initiative, online learning, I think things actually could be seized, and the opportunity was seized to not only meet the challenge, but also eventually improve on legitimacy of the online learning experience. So with this, I would like to thank you very much for your attention. If you have any questions, please feel free to ask me.
Thank you very much for your sharing, such that we know we are not alone because this is a worldwide issue. And we have time for 1 minute question and answer session. Are there any questions from the floor? If not, then may I ask you a question? What do you think is the most challenging of converting a traditional face-to-face learning into online learning, especially in the face of pandemic? It's a very fast and very we should take immediate responses. What are the most challenging part?
Very good question. I think that I can contrast this with the situation whereby there is no pandemic. Okay, if we're talking about the pandemic situation, the good news is that we expected at that institution, at least anyway, they expected to have a resistance from the students and the instructors, particularly the part-time instructors, because this particular institution relies heavily on part-time instructors. The good news is that everybody understood that this was an emergency situation. Therefore, we cannot simply start to argue that online learning is not good, that it's not going to work, and so on and so forth. So basically, people went along with this initiative. So in a normal situation, and we experienced it prior to the pandemic, there were some resistance at that institution for online learning, although this was slowly melting away since 2018, 2 years earlier. But in 2020, let's say in January, prior to the pandemic, there was still a bit of resistance, and I think that this would have taken a lot longer for the acceptance. Now the resistance actually, in my view, has been broken. I would say completely, and this is not only happening at that institution, I suspect it's worldwide.
Oh, yes, I agree with you. Especially that I agree with you that the crisis can be turned into opportunity. Yes.
Yeah. Thank you so much.
Presentation and sharing.